Hi guys, in preparation for our homework assignment, I've got some questionnaire design challenges for you. So I thought maybe it'd make sense, right, if we start talking. This is the first time I've ever done this. This is a brand new. So, and the idea is continuous improvement, right? So every semester this course runs, right, which is on actually the annual basis, the course should get better. So I'm constantly trying to tweak, trying to understand, and one of the measurements I have, at least an informal measurement, right, is looking at the quality of the assignments. And when I pose a question in the assignment, how well do you guys do? How well you do in assessment practices is an indication of how well I do. So the better you do, then what that tells us, you know, in the teaching arena is the better you do, then it's an indication of the better job that I've done. So I want to give you some tools for questionnaire design, and this is a tough one. Why is this tough? Well, we talked about John Krosnick in the Attitudes lecture, and I took a graduate level course with Krosnick in survey research and design. It was not a very exciting class. Looking at survey instruments and survey design and scaling and all this good stuff, it's not the most exciting thing in the world, but it was one of the most useful classes I've taken. So I'm going to hope to share some of what I learned in that class with you guys to facilitate your ability to develop good questionnaires, good questionnaire items. So, butterflies are free. Butterflies on the Zinnia. This is year before last. There was tremendous butterfly activity on the Zinnias. Butterflies were much far and fewer between this year, so I don't know what the difference was. It was a hotter, drier summer. Maybe that had something to do with it. But I try and grow a bunch of flowers that attract the butterflies. So there they are. So this lecture, it's an addendum to Lesson 6, Values, Attitudes, Abilities, Job Satisfaction. It's going to be essential to completing homework 16. Sorry, I think I said 17 earlier. It's 16. So there you go. Let's talk about some common survey question problems. And we know that we've all had to take probably employee satisfaction surveys, and this is in part what this is about. But there's a lot of other surveys. There can be skill acquisition surveys. That is, if we provide a training to someone, then how do we know the training was successful? Then we might have a survey or a test of sorts, right? So, or if we're trying to affect attitude change, then we need to survey the attitudes post attitude change manipulation. So what are some common survey problems? And the question is too vague. And remember, I discussed this earlier when I said, what's your attitude towards smoking? If I'm trying to predict if someone's going to quit smoking, the question's too vague. I need to be more specific. The question should be, what is your attitude towards quitting smoking? And someone might say, I think it's a good idea to quit smoking. But then that's still pretty damn vague, and notice it doesn't have a time frame either. What is your attitude towards quitting smoking by the end of this year? Makes it even more specific. And notice the more specific our questions are, the more predictive they are of the actual behavior. So when we write survey questions for like an employee satisfaction survey, we should be very specific in what area of satisfaction. I mean, if you want to ask what's your general level of satisfaction with the company, that's fine. But then break it down in subsequent questions to more specific areas. And typically areas that we're willing or prepared to do something about. So when the question's too vague, what's the problem? Well, people might interpret the question differently, and then the data becomes unreliable because we have some people thinking about one thing, other people thinking about entirely another. And then if the data becomes unreliable, then we know that the data is meaningless because the question isn't useful. So unreliability, then meaninglessness, and I don't know how many surveys have been written that generate absolutely meaningless data. I remember in Krosnick's class, our final exam, which pissed me off to no end, and I'll get to that in a minute, but he gave us what was about a 150-page survey. And this is a survey that he'd been asked to look at why the survey was so horrible after the survey had been given, which is a big mistake and a big waste of money. And I don't know whose survey it was, and he wouldn't tell us, but we have this 150-page survey. That was just bullshit. It was horrible, right? But it was great for the class because as a final exam, he said, okay. He said, here's the assignment. Take the survey. Leave it in the envelope. Do not open it. When you're ready to take your final exam, you take your final exam at home. You get 2 hours. So what I want you to do when you say, I'm ready, sit down at your computer, open the survey, read the survey, and then using course content, write down everything with examples of how horrible the survey is and why. And God, I was so pissed off because I did. I opened it up. I spent 2 hours. I generated a couple pages of work. I turned it in, and I got a B-. And I actually asked Krosnick, I said, hey, can I talk to you about my final exam? And I went in, and I said, John, I got a B-. I thought I did pretty well on this. And he says, well, yeah, I mean, you did okay. But he said, here is a good example of the final exam. And he pulled out another student's paper, and it was 35 pages long. And I remember I looked at him and I said, John, do you expect me to believe that this student followed your instructions? That they waited and they opened it up and they read it for 2 hours while typing their answers and they generated 35 pages? And he knew at that point I'd gotten him, and he looked at me and he just said, I don't know. And it was like, well, obviously whoever took this cheated on the instructions, right? Because they spent a lot more time than 2 hours on it. So anyway, that's an aside. Now, the downside is I became very, very dissatisfied with Krosnick as a result of this. And when my advisor, Phil Tetlock, left in my third year, right, Krosnick came to me and he said, hey, I know Tetlock's leaving. You need a new advisor. What do you think about coming to work in my lab? And I'm like, no, I'm going to work in Marilyn's lab. And I hadn't asked Marilyn yet, but I was not going to work in Krosnick's lab. That just doesn't work for me, right? So anyway, sorry about that. Too many questions. Some surveys, man, like the one we worked on for that class, it was like 100 pages long. I don't know how long it was. It was insane. I can't believe that anyone would be able to maintain the attention to answer the survey. What we found in our research, give or take 20, 30 questions is about it before people get bored, they get tired, and then they start not concentrating, and the survey becomes more and more meaningless the longer people participate on it. So they get frustrated and they begin satisficing, which is this cool term, is, okay, you asked me to complete the survey, there's 150 questions, I paid attention for the first 20, you asked me to complete the survey. What does completing the survey mean? Well, at a bare minimum, it means checking a response option for each numbered item. So I don't even have to write. Now I'm just checking, right, and going down the list. And a lot of times people check in different spots so they can't be detected. Satisficing. Keep it brief and run multiple surveys if you have more questions than that. Data analysis or reporting may become too cumbersome. So if you expect people to read your analysis, right, of a 150-page survey, I don't think so. Most people, want to keep it brief. They want to keep it focused. They don't want this long-ranging, novel-length survey analysis. So not only did you insanely bore the participants who took the survey, and now the data becomes unreliable because they're satisficing. Now you're going to write this document that no one wants to read because it's too long, and it becomes ridiculous. So, survey design, prescriptions, proscriptions, and I finally learned the difference between those two words. If you don't know the difference, you might want to look in case you have to take the GRE, right, or the LSAT, or the MCAT, or any of those awesome tests. Use a written label for each response option. Okay, and I'm going to show you the examples in a couple minutes. Response labels should be as close in incremental magnitude as possible. That is, they should make sense, and I'm going to show you some examples. Don't use numbers on the response items. The responses are not 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Those numbers are meaningless, and in fact, they go counter necessarily to the meaning of the study. Each question should provide the response labels. Do not merely list them at the top of the sheet. Have the response labels at each item. I know it takes a little longer to produce the survey, but put in the effort, right? Don't use double-barreled questions. One topic per question. What's a double-barreled question, you ask? Well, let me ask you this, and this is a good employee satisfaction survey question maybe, or at least decent. To what extent does your supervisor understand and support you? It's two different questions. It needs to be split up. To what extent does your supervisor understand you? Okay. And more specific would be even better. To what extent does your supervisor understand the conflicts to which you've been subjected? Okay, now that's getting pretty damn specific. And to what extent does your supervisor support you in those conflicts or whatever? Notice, I can understand but not support. So don't put those two together because it's two different issues, right? And Annika has returned to us. So, better to ask two questions. Better to be more specific is the context. To what extent does your supervisor understand the stress caused by moving up deadlines on your projects? Now notice, this is going to generate reliable data because almost all participants are going to interpret this the same way because of its level of specificity. To what extent does your supervisor provide you support in the face of impending project deadlines? And then we could be even more specific. From this, we ask that as an overview question in terms of additional manpower, in terms of additional whatever, in terms of, right? So be specific, because if you're trying to use a satisfaction survey to re-engineer policies, to introduce new policies that will show necessary improvement in the areas you're interested in, you got to be specific, right? And notice the Holy Trinity: needs assessment, program design, and program evaluation. Needs assessment requires questionnaires in many cases, and so does program evaluation require many questionnaires to understand how well the program worked. So, standard survey construction, what do we know? Likert type scales are most frequently employed. My second advisor, Marilyn, Dr. Methods, I used to call her because she was a methodologist par excellence. She always got pissed off when people said Likert scales, because she said Likert developed a specific scale that was then named a Likert scale. It is not the scale that people are talking about when they use the term Likert scale. Those are Likert type scales, but not genuine specific Likert scales. So just for Marilyn there, right? So odd numbers of responses, 5, 7, 9, are typically preferred. But the problem then comes with the central response can mean different things to different respondents, especially if it's unlabeled and simply numbered. So let's take a look at a couple scales. Let's get right into it here. What do we know? Unipolar scale. Now, why is it unipolar? Because it goes from nothing to a lot. It doesn't go from negative to positive. Negative to positive is a bipolar scale with a very interesting central. Unipolar goes from not at all to always, basically. So, how often are you frustrated by company policies? Never, seldom, sometimes, often, always. Now, let's look at the scale construction. What we see is no numbers. It's not numbered 1 through 5. Because think about it. If we label never 1 and seldom 2, which would make sense, then that mathematically implies that seldom is twice never. And then if 1 is never and often is 4, is often 4 times never? Notice the numbers are insane. They make no sense whatsoever. Now, internally, you're going to use the numbers because that's how you do your statistical magic. But they should not be presented to the participant because it's suggesting that these are equally incremented, which they aren't necessarily. You'd have to do a whole bunch of Thurstone scaling studies to understand that. Yes, I did take a class in this. So this is a good overall question with an appropriate scale. Right? A more specific question might be of greater value. That is, are you often frustrated by company policies? Well, which company policy? Okay. Now, how often are you frustrated by departmental required paperwork might be a better way to go with this. Okay, so this is a unipolar scale, and in the assignment, if you're asked to use this, then you're going to use it, right? So now bipolar scales capture both positive and negative. So in this case, let's try the question, And having taken the Excel table creation training, how confident are your ability to make tables in Excel? So we give a training. We find out, oh, our people aren't necessarily facile with using Excel to make tables. So we provide a training, right? We did the needs assessment. We design a program. This is part of the evaluation of the program. Third element of the Holy Trinity, right? This is a question we might ask. Notice it's a 7-item response rather than the 5 as I showed you in the Unipolar. And Unipolar is often 5 items. Bipolar often 7, sometimes 9 items. But it goes from very confident to somewhat confident to slightly confident. Now, what is it with the center point? Neither confident nor unconfident. What the hell does that mean? And this is why the center point is somewhat problematic, because I think there's a couple different ways to interpret that. But nonetheless, let's just go with it. Slightly unconfident, somewhat unconfident, and very unconfident. And notice what we've done here is the scale labels have been matched as closely as possible. So on either side of the center point is slightly. Move out somewhat. Very on both. So it's matched, right? And this matching enhances the reliability of the use of the scale. Okay? Now, one other issue with this question that I should point out, and it's not an earth-shattering question, but if you're going to do it, why not do it right? And if you're going to do it right, why not do it excellently? Hello, Electron. Are you proud of that? You know those blow-up packaging pieces that you put in boxes, right, to protect stuff? We leave those out for the cats. So here's Electron, proudly demonstrating his packaging filler. The world of cats. Do you like that, Annika? Annika, your nose is running. Go get Electron. Okay. So, find point then. You might reverse the above such that the negative goes to positive as below. And that is negativity usually to the left and positivity to the right on these scales. I mean, it's not earth-shattering. But one thing for sure, keep them the same direction so that your participants don't get confused. So if you're using negative left, positive right, stay consistent throughout your questionnaire. Make the questionnaire as friendly to your people as possible. So let's try this. We got a 5-point scale down in the bottom to demonstrate another aspect of this. How would you rate your reaction time ability? Please circle 1. Okay. Notice, too, there's something I haven't included in the other questions, but I'm trying to do this so that I remember to bring up these points. Notice, each question should actually have the instruction embedded in the question, too. So how could we improve question number 3 above? Please check the appropriate response. Or please check one appropriate response, right? So we have that in parentheses. So I know it's a little redundant and it makes the scale a little bigger, but so in each case, what we have is labels on each point, right? We have labels that make sense in their spacing, their distance from each other, right? We have instructions. We remain consistent in direction, so we would flip this one around if we wanted to be consistent in direction. Bipolar scales then capture both negative and positive. Notice, very good to very poor. Poor to good. Is poor the opposite of good? And people might then argue about that, and I think it's a context dependent. Krosnick did develop a book while we were in class, and I think he was using us to help him with the book. So there are books out there that talk about nothing but scale design as part of it. So, one caveat, though, is notice I asked, right? Where is it? Okay. I asked, how would you rate your reaction time ability? Is that a question that even needs to be asked? Right? Because notice, we can measure reaction time. We don't have to ask people what they think about their reaction time. We can actually test their reaction time. So both example questions could actually be replaced by behavioral assessments. We could give someone an Excel table creation test. We could actually test someone's reaction time. Think about this. How often are we asking questions when we should actually just be measuring performance? And that's another interesting issue. So we could test, folks. We could test, and the questions assess perceptions and attitudes And notice we might do both. We might ask someone about their confidence in making Excel tables, and we might test them to see if the confidence then implies the actual success. Right? So let's force the choice. And here's where we use even numbered scales. So we push people off that center option where it's neither this nor that necessarily. And let's ask, here's one. Let me ask you this, if you can figure out what we're trying to measure here. In a world of sheepdogs and wolves, I'm most like a wolf. Does that not apply at all? Not apply very well? Applies fairly well, and applies very well. Notice, we're not letting people off the hook. We're not allowing them to take some center option. The center option doesn't exist. Either you're on one side or the other. So we're pushing people, and sometimes people resent those kind of manipulations, but oh well. And notice, this is assessing a measure of predation. To what extent does someone view themselves as a predator? Okay. Now, and notice we have three choices. We have victim, we have protector, or predator, represented by those animal species. And this is a little thing we've been working on for years, off and on. So a pre-screening tool to assess levels of predatory instinct. So 12. Let's try question 12. How comfortable are you with discussing observed production inefficiencies with your immediate supervisor? Notice, we're getting pretty good here. We've got please check one. Right? Very uncomfortable, somewhat uncomfortable. We seem to be going in the negative to positive direction, so that's kind of a plus there. We got no scale numbers, so good, right? And we have even balanced, so that represents a pretty damn solid, well-written question. And notice that it's relatively specific. I want to know if my employees, when they observe production inefficiencies, if they're comfortable with talking to their supervisors. And if I find out that my employees are not comfortable talking to their supervisors about production inefficiencies, I want to know the hell why, and it's going to generate a more specific survey or discussion, focus groups, what have you. So sometimes we might want to assess values, behaviors, decision making. So let's try this one out. This is a scenario-based question, describes a situation, and then it offers two behavioral options. So again, we're pushing people one direction or another, and this is not a good standalone question. It would need to be used with a bunch of questions. Imagine you're a security guard in a department store. One of your duties is loss prevention. You notice a customer in the store that's behaving suspiciously. You become concerned they may be about to shoplift. Would you prefer to, and notice, very specific instruction, please circle the answer that best fits your response. Would you make yourself obvious to the shopper to prevent them from shoplifting? Or would you hide, observe, and then arrest the shoplifter as they leave the store with the item they took? And notice, one is prevention-oriented, that's A. The other is predator-oriented, that is, I'm going to lay in wait and pounce on my prey at the appropriate time. So you can see how that dovetails with the question previously. So, other aspects to look at, right? The following question relate to pastimes, personal preferences. Please answer the following questions with yes or no. You get one choice or the other, right? And notice 86 through 90, interesting questions. Are you vegetarian? Are you vegan? Do you hunt? Do you fish? Do you play laser tag? Again, these are from our predator measure, right? And you can see how predators might answer in one way or the other, but all those questions are probably illegal in an employment capacity because we can't ask people about their personal lives. So 91 represents what would be a skills inventory question, and for example at Columbus State we did a skills inventory analysis for our faculty to see who could do what. Could you speak a language? Could you use PowerPoint? Could you shoot a video? Could you do all these other things? So that we could apportion work in a reasonable manner to the people within our department because we knew its skills. So 91's okay. The others probably not so good. And now, scale items. There are exceptions, right? Especially when we think in terms of a 1 to 10 scale. This is, think about animals in the wild. The following 7 items are traits and characteristics that help animals survive. Rate the level of importance of each trait or characteristic on a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 indicating not important for survival, 10 indicating very important for survival. Notice the 1 through 10 scale fits well here. Put a check mark in the space above each number to indicate your answer. So how important is eyesight? How important is intelligence, etc.? So I just wanted to show you that scale numbers are sometimes appropriate. Let's mash it up. Okay? Here's a typical process list for conducting a useful and accurate survey, an unflowed flowchart, if you will. So let's conduct a survey. Brainstorm a list of desired survey information. Prioritize the list, the brainstorm list. So what do we need to know? Let's generate a list, right? And then prioritize the list through maybe a system of 10-4 voting. Remember that? Limit the number of topics to be surveyed so our survey questionnaire is brief enough. Right? Conduct the pilot test of the survey, give it to some people so that it makes sense. Ask them, is this question clear? They'll point out any mistakes you've made. Modify the questions as necessary. Right? Conduct the survey, analyze the data, and prepare the report, and share the report with the people who took the damn survey. That way they'll participate more freely in the future. Okay? So, thorough planning and piloting, getting it right the first time. Don't conduct a survey and then find out the questions were bullshit and you've wasted all this time and money. Mistakes can generate incomplete and or meaningless data, represent a waste of time, horrible inefficiency. Right? And they can waste, more importantly, your employee goodwill in filling out future surveys in a detailed and honest manner. So, check out your assignment. I hope these helpful hints will make you feel more comfortable and more confident in completing the assignment, homework 16. And let's call it good. And remember that butterflies are free. So you guys have a great day. Take care.